Well, welcome everyone to another exciting episode of the Magic Sandwich Show, where I am joined by our two regulars, Concordance and Thunderfoot. The more astute of you will recall that in the last show, I said that Professor Phil Moriarty from Nottingham University, contributor to the YouTube channel 60 Symbols, was going to be with us today. Unfortunately, commitments came at the last minute, and yesterday he informed me he had to pull out. So I apologise that he's not here. We will be having him on a future show, possibly the next one or the one after. The next one we might have the return of someone who seemed to be fairly popular on the last time she appeared, Dr. Lona Frank. So those are two people to look forward to on future shows. But, as I say, we are joined by the two regulars, Concordance and Thunderfoot. You have just seen a video of Felix Baumgartner leaping from 23 miles above the surface of the Earth. And we're going to start the show with a conversation about that and about some of the science and physics behind it. But before we do so, there are a couple of things that we're going to deal with. The first is Concordance is going to tell us about what an exciting weekend he has had, because I know he's met, amongst other people, IERA. And then we're going to discuss briefly Thunder's latest video. Before that, I meant to say that our heartfelt sentiments go out to all of those who are presently at Lourdes in France seeking a miracle. What they actually have at the moment is a flood, and unfortunately, the tomb where the statue of the Virgin Mary is 3 feet underwater at the moment, which is a great shame. But all we can say is God works in mysterious ways. Why he's done it, who knows? But it'll all be okay in the end. Anyway, on that note, let's get started. Concordance, tell us about your weekend and meeting the Texan tank.
Well, I've met Aaron in real life before. I had dinner at his house once, and he cooked me steak, and it was a good steak. But I did meet a few other people. So I was at the Texas Free Thought Convention, where I met up with Gallus Sapien, who uploaded some excellent videos today. He was recording right behind me at the pep rally. But the featured speakers were Aaron Ra, Richard Dawkins, P.Z. Myers, Matt Dillahunty. Is it Richard Faircloth?
Sure.
Sean Faircloth. And then one of the speakers was ill and unable to participate. But I had a chance to shake a few hands, meet a few people, meet some Austin people. I had my first chance to be an atheist in real life around other atheists. That was interesting. And then yesterday we had a live, I would say a plenary session, Magic Sandwich Show with Aaron Ra and I, and P.Z. Myers. Which got a bit tense at moments just because of things that had been said between us back and forth online.
Let's not avoid that issue. I know that you've made a video about him and what you perceive to be his restriction on free speech. Let's discuss a little bit about that. I don't want to make this into an attack on PZ, but give us the details of the background of that.
You know, I'm not interested in criticizing PZ. I'm not an attacker. I'm not his enemy. I honestly wanted to try to persuade him that he might restore comments on his YouTube videos. He's closed those down and committed to closing all comments from this point on in all YouTube videos, and also closing ratings, so you're not able to rate or comment on his videos, although he invites people to go to his moderated blog and make comments there. My comment to him online, through video, through Twitter, was that, you know, the YouTube community would be better served if there were an open forum for people to express their feelings about the content of each video. And during the course of our discussion, both on the panel and off the panel, you know, I'm trying to be as understanding as I can be. But my argument was that PZ is using YouTube in a very different way than I use YouTube. I use YouTube because it's a place to engage with people of all backgrounds, all types, all religious belief or non-belief, and all scientific backgrounds. Pharyngula is obviously a tool much more for atheists, people who are interested in PZ's point of view. and that maybe it's not as important to PZ that he leave that engagement open. His engagement is through Feringula. And he disagreed with the characterization of Feringula as not being an outreach-based organization, which I think I would still disagree with him on pretty strongly. I don't see a lot of creationists checking on Feringula on a weekly basis, where I think a lot of them probably do watch videos on evolution or might stumble across.
I just want to pick up on a comment that someone in the chat has made, Dave858, because I think this resonates with a lot of people. He makes the observation that disabling comments and ratings smells strongly of what we're familiar with from creationists.
Yeah.
And the like.
Yeah. People who don't like criticism, people who don't invite engagement, people who want to say their piece but not risk being criticized. He even had the option of comments pending approval. But that is an extra workload for him. He manages his blog, and he had the option of just leaving it open and ignoring it. But that also was not something he was interested in. And I'm trying to be as neutral as I can. Obviously, I have a stronger feeling. Did he explain? From my perspective.
Did he explain his reasoning and justification for doing so?
Yeah, but I didn't really like it. His honest reasoning, according to him, is that he just doesn't want to provide a forum for people to make stupid and repetitive comments. He said it's not about the criticism, it's about the level of discourse, that YouTube commenters are universally stupid, and that they don't read each other's quotes, they don't read each other's posts, so it's just the same comments, inane comments over and over. And YouTube is a shithole, I think is the term he likes.
Which, with the exception of the broad brush insults to basically everyone on YouTube, is exactly the reasons that VenomFangX gave for blocking and banning people. That he was only going to block and ban arseholes, and he didn't. It was his forum. If he didn't want to deal with your comments, then he could do it. And I think it's very sad that PZ is, to my knowledge, the only atheist on YouTube who actually behaves this way. And you take a look at the company that he's in. He's in company with the likes of Discover Institute. He's like VenomFangX used to be. His line, his approach here is almost identical to what Dawa Films said when it was on the limits of free speech. And I think that it's very sad that we actually have someone batting for our side who has this very short-sighted approach to free speech.
Let me speak up for PZ. I'm going to try to be as diplomatic as I can be here, because, again, it's very hard for me to step out of my own position and how I use YouTube. But let's just say that PZ is not interested in a YouTube presence. He's interested in just hosting his videos there. And if that's his only intent, and he finds the comments to be distracting or annoying, then I think maybe as a video hosting site, YouTube is convenient for him, but he's not interested in engagement on YouTube. And that's really what he's said by this.
Allow me to give the... you can play PZ for this one. The rebuttal that I would give to something like that is YouTube is actually a public forum. Right. And it's one of those things that if you actually want to go into a public forum like YouTube, I mean, this would be like going into sort of speaker's corner with a megaphone or something, and using this to put out your ideas, where there is actually a facility for people to actually put up contentious points of view in return, and you saying, no, you're not allowed to speak here. Now, that, I think, shows a great short-sightedness in that unless you're going to decree by fiat that you know all of the right answers and there is no possibility that you can't be wrong, this sort of dogmatic approach that we've seen again and again with these highly religious folks, unless you're going to say that, you have to accept that other people might have actually sat down and thought about these matters as long and as hard as you have, and you might be wrong on this. And this is why I think it's very important that even if you think that you have the best arguments, that you have to let people say their piece, because I really like the cabal of the free speech of YouTube, in that it does tend to happen that the good ideas rise to the top, and it's really quite infrequent that you get these top-rated comments on YouTube that aren't actually sort of fairly close to the mark. And I think that's a fantastic feature, and it's very sad that PZ is essentially taking the route of dogma here.
Yeah, I want to make very clear, because it's so easy to conflate two issues, and that is the issue of allowing your critics a chance to confront you and curtailing their free speech. This is not a free speech issue. Free speech is about the government preventing people from saying unpopular things. This is about one person not listening to their critics. It's about closing the door. Now, he says he doesn't want to listen to these people because they are idiotic and repetitive. They're not putting the basic effort in. Your analogy, I think, is somewhat apropos. If you have, let's say, a free speech corner wherever all these speakers are there, and there's a street preacher, and he's making all these assertions, and people engage with him, he doesn't have to respond to those people. He could tell them, come by my church on Sunday, listen to the service, or come in after the service, and I'll answer your questions at my church, right? And people don't show up on Sunday because that feels weird. It feels like you're going into the lion's den. They're much less likely than if he were willing to engage there. I think so much more is accomplished when people have a chance to freely exchange ideas on neutral ground at the point at which the discussion is taking place. Even though a second forum is available, even though Pharyngula is available and minimally moderated, it still is the lion's den. And they joke about this, about, we want these people here, we call them chew toys. Well, if you call someone a chew toy, how likely are they to freely speak their mind? If you really honestly are trying to intimidate someone, it goes against that culture of free expression on neutral ground that YouTube fosters pretty well. Now, for that, we pay a price of having, yes, a lot of idiotic comments, a lot of profanity, a lot of very offensive and hurtful things are said. But along with that, we get a true neutral ground. We get to hear everyone, whether they hate our guts or they love us to death, they both have access to the same forum. There's value in that, and it's not what PZ values. He's much more about his own fan base, his own community, and that's fine. We need both. We need the outreach and we need the in-reach. We need both.
I mean, let me just read you. This is what PC's rules are for posting on his blog. The absolute law. I am the boss, and don't you forget it. I have the sole absolute power here. I can ban you. I can destroy your comment. I can shut down the whole thread. I am a being of caprice. I don't have to justify anything I do. So when I tell you to stop doing something, stop. Don't argue with me. You don't like that I banned your friend? Tough. Don't complain to me. I'll do as I want in this place. It's my party, and that's all that matters. This law supersedes all other rules. Now, I mean, that to me, you could have argued once that this was tongue-in-cheek, but I don't think so anymore. And this is, I think, what disturbs me the most, is having people act like jerks. That's their own affair. But it really doesn't speak well to one's character when you are given this small amount of power over a small amount of internet's turf and you abuse, well, I mean, you don't abuse it, but you essentially run it like a little dictator. And then if that's how you treat small amounts of power, how would you trust such people with real power? I mean, in many ways, these are not people you would want in roles of leadership or anywhere near leadership, because these attitudes are toxic to progress.
I'm sorry, I had to go away. There's somebody at the door, so I apologize for that. I'm going to bring in our first caller at this stage because he seems to be in disagreement with the observations made by.
Yeah, I hope we don't get too bogged down in this.
No,
because
I'm not going to allow it to get too
you
bogged
wanna
down, and I certainly don't want to concentrate on PZ personally or particularly in great
hope
detail
ultimately-
much longer. But let's hear what
let me real quickly.
Robert
I
has to
hope
say.
ultimately
Concordance, and then we'll go to the caller.
we can get past this and move on, and PZ can do what he wants. That's his right. I tried to persuade him. That was my honest intent, was to try to convince him it might be of more value to have the comments open. But I am not interested in slamming someone within our community.
Yes, likewise. Robert, can you mute your mic until we come to you?
I'm done.
Okay, we'll come to you then, Robert.
Right. Thanks for having me, guys. The first thing I'd like to say is, yes, I do broadly agree with you, Concordance, in that it's a value judgment, and his decision to moderate comments on his videos can have an adverse effect for him or not. So insofar as that, I'm satisfied. Insofar as what Thunderfoot has said, I don't find myself in agreement in that he says YouTube is a public forum. It's not a public forum. It is, by definition, a private company. It belongs to Google. Moreover, the channels that are on YouTube belong to the people that host those channels, insofar as YouTube gives them discretion to run those channels in accordance with its rules and regulations. Now, if someone chooses to seal up something which is essentially his own on YouTube and close it down to comments, that's entirely their prerogative. So I don't see where you come in to say that YouTube is this public forum and all the channels on it are a public forum.
Well, let me come back on that. YouTube serves a functional role, and if it doesn't serve that functional role, then people would find something that did. And the functional role that YouTube provides is largely an open forum. So whilst you're correct that YouTube could, in principle, there's probably loads of legal details that would crop up, but while YouTube could in principle, behave in exactly the same fashion as PZ Myers is doing here, I think that YouTube would almost instantly become the boogeyman if it did. In other words, whilst you are right that YouTube could in principle do whatever it wants with its open space, it can't do that whilst maintaining its position as a company in the open marketplace. And like you, at the risk of repeating what I said earlier, with PZ, he can be a jerk and block and ban people all he wants. But as far as I'm concerned, if you abuse small amounts of power, then and do it so with such relish, then I'm fairly uncomfortable with it. I don't think it's fitting to have that sort of person in leadership roles.
I must say, I don't understand how it is an abuse of power to exercise the power that is at your discretion, namely moderating your forum as you choose. You're going to have to explain to me how that is in and of itself an abuse.
If it's and so here's where we run again into the conflation of freedom of speech and the principle of allowing your critics a voice, even in your own forum. And I know most people are unwilling to do that. There's no obligation for them to give their critics a voice in that forum. They can, if they want, stack the deck so that only a certain position is represented. And that's what we see in certain media channels. I think Fox News is a good example. They will give one side of the story without giving any kind of voice to the opposition. And that's okay in some situations, if that's the kind of thing you're doing. And that's why I say I understand to some extent what PZ is trying to create. He's trying to create a community where criticism is allowed, but at a certain level of discourse or a certain amount of respect is granted, or a certain amount of certain rules. We'll just leave it there. And I think my argument would be that if you restrict yourself to the ability to censor a certain level of dialogue in YouTube. Now, on his own blog, it makes perfect sense to me, but on YouTube, if you shut it down so that no one gets to comment, it doesn't promote the principle of free expression. It's not free speech. We're not talking about legal rights being abridged. We're talking about allowing critics a chance to confront you, to give you the chance to be wrong, to be falsified.
Do you not feel that they have that opportunity on their own channels? Do you really think something is added in a 500 character comment
Yes.
on YouTube with that little space? What is added?
Yeah.
What
is added is there is actually a feedback. It becomes an interactive forum. And what I frequently find with YouTube is that when you have all these thousands of people commenting, and even if they only have 500 characters, what tends to come to the top, what tends to be the most upvoted comments, tends to be the cream of putting things very succinctly. And the feedback is very useful for the video maker, to let them know whether people agree with the points, whether they disagree with them, or whether the message that you wanted to get across was the message that actually people got out of it. It's very useful. So yeah, I think that YouTube would be a greatly diminished forum if there wasn't the ability to comment on videos.
I tend to agree with you. I do feel it would be diminished, but I'm not speaking about YouTube as an entirety, simply about Myers at this point.
As I said before, I don't want to get this too concentrated on PC Myers. Let's stick with the general issue of whether YouTube should be a forum for free speech or...
Broadly, as a general issue, I can't object to the current system, but I also do like that YouTube retains for its users the options to moderate should it be necessary. Perhaps on your level, Thunderfoot, you're a very big user. You've got hundreds of thousands of subscribers. For smaller users, actual attacks on the person, actual attacks, flagging attacks, vote bot attacks, these were things which you were subject to back in the day when your channel was a lot smaller. So for smaller channels like the ones that I have and those around me, they are much more readily subject to these things. And perhaps what you see on the bigger channels in that you say the cream of the comments rises to the top. What I see, and this includes some of the channels where the person has some odd 15,000 subscribers, I see comments that are supportive of the host of the channel or the video maker rising to the top, whereas comments which are in disagreement with the video maker rise to the bottom. Now, this doesn't matter whether the video maker seems to be making a good point or a cogent point or not. You can go and look at certain groups of racists on YouTube, and you'll find that the top-rated comments are those which are in agreement with said racist person or person which seems to me to be racist. And you can go and look at your videos, and you can find the top-rated comments are largely going to be those which are in agreement with you. I also feel that within the character limits, that is 500 characters, very little actual discourse can take place. The other thing is, sadly, YouTube can, for some, not for all, be a very hostile place. So I can see some merit in those that do not enjoy that kind of hostility, speaking on a more moderated forum.
Okay, I've got several bits to add to that. The part about comments always being supportive, whilst it's generally true, it is generally true that on YouTube, people go to the videos that they like, and they usually leave fairly positive comments about that. So in that sense, YouTube is this forum where the converted find the preachers, if you'll excuse the metaphor. But that's not universally true. I mean, if you take, for instance, the videos that PZ disabled his comments on, there he was, even to his own home audience, essentially getting his ass handed to him. And, I think it is something that you've got to learn to deal with if you want to inject yourself into the public forum, is that if people don't like what you're saying, they will tell you. And sometimes they will make very good points while doing it.
And I totally agree with that, Thunder. And the thing you've got to recall, Robert, is that people who set up a YouTube channel, who make a video, who post it onto YouTube, do so completely voluntarily. They're not forced into doing so. And as Thunder says, if you put yourself into the public arena in that way, then I think that it's only appropriate that you should have the courtesy of listening to responses and to simply block all responses, ignore any response. I think at the very least is discourteous.
And let me add one very brief extra point, is this is, I think, almost a new skill that people haven't had to have up to this point, up until there is this possibility to interact with these huge numbers of people online, is that young people have to develop this skill of being able to take, basically not letting such criticism get to them too much. In that, what was he called? The guy who was on the Gingers Have Souls guy. What was he called?
The one with the red hair?
Yeah.
Carrot Cab. Was it Carrot Cab? Or Copper Cab?
Copper Cab. That's the one. That there is this potential to get this absolutely astronomical amount of hatred. And if I'm not so sure how I would have actually dealt with that at that sort of age, but it's one of those things that when you actually, you've got to learn to deal with the criticism. If you do say stupid things, you've got to learn to live with the fact that people will keep bringing them up, and words will come back like that to haunt you. And that's a skill that, in many ways, I look back at, the man I was when I was teenagers to 25 or something, and a lot of the things that I said and did then, I would feel fairly embarrassed about now. But now people get online and say those things, and they don't really have the experience to see where this is going to go in the long run. And so it's a very interesting time like that.
Fair enough.
Thunder, I'm going to throw in something else and just take your view on this. I think it was not the last show, the show before, perhaps, when we were talking about freedom of speech, and I indicated that by virtue of the Public Order Act, certain modest limitations have been imposed on free speech. And one of the examples I used as to whether you thought where the extent of free speech ended was whether you thought it was acceptable for someone to stand on a street corner and shout nigger at any black person that walked past them. More recently, excuse me, I know that you're aware of this, someone called Nick Griffin, who a lot of people may not be familiar with. He's the leader of the British National Party in this country. Posted on Twitter the address of a gay couple who had recently won a legal case. Now, in those circumstances, Thunder, do you think that goes beyond the acceptable limits of free speech, or do you think it's perfectly acceptable for these people, and not only to drop their addresses, actually appear to incite people to take action against them? Do you think that that is legitimate free speech?
No, I mean, I would draw the line that there are very few limits. If you're putting forward ideas and concepts, there are essentially no limits or boundaries as far as I'm concerned. However, when you're dealing with people, if someone has not injected themselves into the public arena, as for instance these people who you're talking about, if they've not injected themselves into the public arena, to then have you don't have the right to drag people in like that. So if someone has made themselves a public figure, as far as I'm concerned, you're more or less fair game yourself. But, for instance, your relatives do not become fair game because they've not done anything to inject themselves into the public arena like that. That makes sense?
Kind of. Concordance.
Some speech is essentially an act, and that includes things like threats. Bullying is a bit of a gray area, right? Because there are some things that are simply critical and not actually bullying. And this is something that courts wrestle with and will continue to wrestle with. And there will probably never be a single definition of what constitutes. Now, I have to put the disclaimer in, yet again, that this is not a free speech issue. It is a matter of allowing your critics a voice in the forum. And let's get to the underlying principle. The underlying principle is that people should give themselves, as a gift to themselves, should give themselves a chance to hear the opposing viewpoint. More, doubly so, triply so, for people who call themselves rationalists or skeptic. They need to be aware of the arguments against their position, and they have a commitment to respond to those arguments rationally, reasonably. We have a commitment to living an evidence-based life. If that's what we want to do, if that's what we want to stand for, we have to be prepared to answer criticism with a reasonable argument. The way someone responds to criticism says so much about them. And that's why, as, again, trying to persuade the blogger in question that people would consider him to have greater integrity if he gave that forum to the stupid people who wanted to yell epithets at him, who wanted to simply be abusive. That still shows his integrity, and it shows their complete lack of reason. Right? It actually can work in your favor. There's actually an argument for free expression because you give an idiot a noose to hang themselves with. If you give them enough rope, enough space, enough time, your side will see their arguments and will become more convinced, will have the moral high ground. If you resort to not censorship, I hate to use that term, but if you resort to disengagement, if you hide somewhere, people question your motives. People question your integrity. And I think that is one compelling reason for anyone who considers themselves rational or skeptical to always be prepared to answer the arguments against your position.
There's a guy called Liberal Viewer who is, I think, a very close to the mark view on this, and that's that the best antidote, the best remedy for bad or false speech is true speech. And it's this general idea that in a truly open arena, right, it's the better ideas tend to fare better than the bad ones. And those who typically want to reduce the amount of what people can say are the ideas that can't actually survive the scrutiny of the open arena. And, you know, this thing with being the underdog, you probably won't know this, but when I started, I was very much the underdog when you compared me to people like Venom Fang X. I mean, but even at that, my approach was that if I make the good media, it will win out in the long game, because good arguments tend to fare better than bad ones, and more. It wasn't planned this way, but I mean I would succeed so much more than he did. But that was the general strategy: is that you actually put out some good media, and this is more than enough to counter the bullshit these creationists are putting out. It's a sort of sunlight is the best sterilant, and the more of it we have, the better. I've got no problem to letting the people like Westboro Baptist Church say their piece, because I think that sort of very much highlights the problem with what they're saying.
I'm minded, seeing that we've been on this topic for the best part of 40 minutes, I'm minded to move on. But thank you very much indeed for the call, Robert.
Okay, take care.
And I'm aware that those who may be listening to this subsequently or watching it subsequently will not be aware, but in the moments leading up to the start of the show, we replayed the Freefall Drop by Felix Baumgartner from 23 miles above the Earth's surface that took place, I think it was about a week ago. And it was something that completely gripped me. I was watching it live on the internet, along with apparently 7 million other people. We're going to talk about that a little and some of the science behind it as well. But my first question to both Concordance and Thunderfoot, I'm kind of guessing you saw some of the footage if you didn't see it live. My first question is, would you do it? In this silence.
Good God, yes. Good God, yes. Give me the balloon.
I think you need the capsules as well, but that's a yes from Thunder. Concordance.
Would I like in principle to do it? Yeah, sure. Would I
Do you
be
think
able
you
to
could?
step off?
I mean, there's this wonderful moment where he's standing about to take that huge leap, 23 miles of just nothing. And apparently, I've tried to verify this, but his heart rate, well, I'll ask you, what do you think his heart rate was when he was standing on the ledge just before he jumped?
To be honest, it wouldn't bother me. I mean, when you're that high up, if the pressure suit fails, you're a dead man before you can...
Oh, don't spoil it. We're coming on to the
dead man
science
long before you
later,
hit the
Thunder.
ground.
We're coming on to that later. Just tell me, what do you think his heart rate was when he was just before he jumped?
40.
Yeah, 140, 150.
It was in the low 60s.
Oh, that's
23 miles up, and your heart rate
DPR,
is
let me
like
tell you
63, I think it was.
What should have been going through his head is, let me get this guy's name right, Pyotr Dolgov, 1962, November 1st. So this is quite a long time ago. And he jumped from 93,970 feet in a pressure suit.
And that's the,
He actually hit his suit on part of the gondola as he was sort of jumping.
We have this moment.
No, DPR, I think we've lost the audio.
Who's saying that?
Have we lost the audio? Oh, the audio's back. Okay.
We're back. All right. I quickly want to deal with this point before we move on to the science of it. Right. As I said, 7 million people apparently. I'm not entirely sure how they count them, but 7 million people watching it live. What do you think happened once his parachute opened?
Well, it dropped hugely.
It dropped by 1 million. So it is to be assumed,
17% is nothing.
Yeah, 15-17% were watching for the train wreck, which is not a great indictment on mankind, really, is it? But, okay, I've dealt with that. Let's get on to the science. And this is one of the things, well, what you mentioned, Concordance, I'll come to in a moment. This was described by a lot of the media that were reporting it as dropping from the edge of space. And that led me to a number of questions. And they're probably going to be pretty dumb for you, but I suspect not unrepresentative of the questions that some people would have. What is it meant by the edge of space, and where is it in relation to the 128,000 feet that he got to?
Well, I mean, it's basically a matter of pressure. I mean, as you get higher and higher, the atmosphere thins out. And whilst it's true that you've lost almost all of the atmosphere by, I think it's about 90 kilometers or something, virtually all of the spacecraft are somewhat above that. About 100, 110 kilometers or something, which is absolutely nothing if you think about it. You know, space is about 2 hours drive away is the usual expression.
But is it just a sort of like vague area, as you say? It's sort of like when the density of the atmosphere reaches a certain point that's then defined as space. I mean, there's obviously not a physical boundary like Hovind's ice canopy, so it's a matter of definition, is it?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I've not actually checked it, but I would guess that it's something along the lines of 90 kilometers. But I mean, the thing is that once you get up to about 5 miles, after you get up to about 5 miles, you've lost 3/4 of the atmosphere. So the atmospheric pressure on top of Mount Everest is about 1/4 of what it is at sea level. And you can only just about survive. That's really the lowest partial oxygen pressure you can actually survive at. You go much above that, and you just pass out and you die. But
then,
you can't.
You've also got the issue that Concordance was referring to, the pressure issue. Now, obviously, he was in a pressurized capsule, and when he opened the capsule, he'd already pressurized his spacesuit. But this is another thing, because again, I think it's probably a loose or slack use of language by the media. But it was stated over and over again, well, you know, if he decompresses at this stage, his blood would boil.
No, that's exactly right.
Well,
That's
talk us through
what
what's happening then.
Nah, your blood won't boil. It can degas. But, I mean, boiling requires you to actually get up to the, whatever the pressure, actually to the point where the vapor pressure is equal to the atmospheric pressure. And that's going to require some heat.
I think you're wrong on that, Thunder.
I worked a lot with vacuum labs.
If the pressure is low enough, you will get more than outgassing. You will actually get a phase transition.
Yes and no.
Before you come back, Thunder, explain what you mean, Concordance.
Well, you can
you're talking
boil
to me.
water. There's an old Mr. Wizard, and this is what I'm going from, not from anything in college, but something I watched when I was probably 11. Mr. Wizard had an experiment where he boiled water with an ice cube, and the point was you get it up boiling, you cap it, and you then sort of create a very low pressure inside, and then when you cool it even further, that low pressure can actually increase the rate at which molecules are coming out to the point where you essentially hit the boiling transition.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, of course, is that the skin is not, there isn't that much, the skin's not very porous to water. So even if you were to put a complete vacuum on one side of your hand, you can't actually boil water through it because there's basically the skin in between.
I think we're thinking of lung tissue here, Thunder. The lung tissue is
won't do you any
lots
good.
of surface area.
Lots of surface area.
Outgassing is probably what would kill you. I mean, I would think that the nitrogen bubbles that would form at ultra low pressure would probably be what would kill you. But I think there would be some liquid transitioning to gas more so than at room temperature or at atmospheric. What do you call it?
Yeah, I mean,
level.
so for instance, yeah, I mean, because this was actually going to be part two of the Large Hadron Collider thing, is that if you were to actually put your hand into a vacuum chamber, your fingers would go. You put your finger in a vacuum chamber, all that happens is it goes purple. And the same thing will happen, I think, if you put your hand in a vacuum chamber. Now, of course, you're right with the lungs that the lungs will outgas. But the thing is that all that'll do is establish a vapor pressure of water in your lungs, which doesn't actually take that much water. So in that sense, if you keep your mouth shut, you won't do that much damage to your lungs. But I think it's the outgassing of nitrogen that's the real killer here.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, my next question then is this. If a balloon that, like he was using, can take you that high, what are the limits? How high could you ever go in a balloon?
Well, I mean, if that's how he went with helium, you can go higher with hydrogen. But the thing about hydrogen is it burns quite well. And you can't go that much higher with hydrogen than you can with helium.
Are the constituents of the atmosphere at that sort of height pretty much the same as they are at lower levels?
The constituents, yes, but the density, no. So if you were to take, let's take a vacuum, a big glass ball that we can actually turn a glass tap and seal. You fill it at sea level and actually weigh it. And the density in there is, well, it's 1 atmosphere. Now you go up to space and fill it with vacuum, close the tap and bring it down to sea level. It's now buoyant, right? Because there's no weight of gas in that big ball, whereas previously there was all the weight of the gas in there. And in fact, it turns out that a vacuum is more buoyant than hydrogen, or helium for that matter, because if you have, what is the density of what is in the ball versus the density of a unit volume of gas outside of the ball? That's what gives you the buoyancy. So by putting hydrogen in there, you're putting a low density gas in, but by putting a vacuum in there, you have nothing in there at all, so it's even more buoyant. Now the problem is, of course, the vacuums tend to collapse. They're crushed by atmospheres. But in principle, if you could make a very lightweight structure that could hold a vacuum, that would in principle be more buoyant than a hydrogen balloon.
Concord. Oh, sorry, I thought you'd finished, Thunder. I do apologize.
It's one of those things that it's an old idea, very old idea, the vacuum balloon, but it's sort of been lost in the annals of history. But it is one that I've actually thought about revisiting. So about a year or two ago, I was kicking around this idea of doing this thing called the V Prize, which would be, I don't know, a few $1,000 prize money for the first person, right? Because we've now got these modern materials like carbon fiber and mylar film and whatever that could potentially be light enough and strong enough to hold a vacuum and be buoyant. And so the V Prize for vacuum prize for the first person who can actually construct a real vacuum balloon.
Well, I shall be getting out my plastic bags and Dyson vacuum cleaner tomorrow.
So,
Concordance.
Just out of interest, one second. Did I get the point across about the vacuum balloon? Like, did you actually understand what I was saying, or?
Yeah, it's a low density container, right? It's a zero density inside and very light on the outside.
Exactly. Did you understand that, DPR?
Because if I wasn't listening to a word you were saying, Thunder, I never do. No, of course, I'm not completely ignorant. But I've got a few more questions before we start taking some more callers. And Concordance, unless you wanted to talk specifically on that point, I just would be interested in the next one, because I suspect there's a very simple answer to it, but hey, I'm thick. I imagine, and we know that the Earth is whizzing around in space around the Sun at some huge figure of miles or kilometers an hour or whatever. I sort of view that a little bit like having a wet tennis ball and you hit this wet tennis ball, and as it flies through the air, some of that moisture is sort of like drawn away from it. Are we losing the atmosphere as the Earth spins around? And if not, why not?
Why am I getting a physics question?
I'll take it. Right.
It was meant for both of you.
I insist on talking about something. I insist.
Well,
on
let's deal with the wet tennis ball first, and then we'll come to you, Concordance.
Right. The answer is yes. We are losing the atmosphere, but not at a significant rate anymore. So heat is basically related to how quickly the molecules are moving. And the Earth's temperature is, give or take, whatever, 300 Kelvin. Now, there isn't a monochromatic. The energy distribution is not monochromatic. It follows this curve called a Boltzmann distribution, which means there are some very high energy particles. So I forget what the average velocity of an oxygen atom is. It's I don't know, hundreds of meters per second. And then you have to compare that to escape velocity. So if you take a particle on the outside of the atmosphere, does it have escape velocity? If it has escape velocity of 11 kilometers per second, then it essentially just flies off into space and nothing stops it. If it doesn't have quite that much velocity, it comes back down again. And so it's this very tip of the Boltzmann distribution which determines how quickly your atmosphere evaporates off the planet. And at the moment, it's almost non-existent for everything below hydrogen and helium-3. And a hydrogen and helium-3, because they're lighter, they actually travel faster. So hydrogen and helium-3, if you release them, they will eventually just get up into the upper atmosphere and fly off into space. Things like oxygen, water, nitrogen, they don't really ever get anywhere near escape velocity. That makes sense?
Hey, yeah, I feel somewhat comforted. It wasn't such a dumb question after all. Just sticking with that issue before we take the next
DPR,
caller.
fess up. You're reading the questions you were going to ask Dr. Moriarty.
No, I'm not actually. These were specifically for you.
Yeah, how about a biochemistry question for Concordance?
Well,
I got one for you.
I haven't got one.
I got a good one for you.
What biochemistry is involved in travelling to 23 miles? Go on.
Radiation is a big issue.
Go on, talk us through that, Concordance, because I sense you feel left out.
I do. When you walk away from your protective atmosphere that protects you from all these gamma rays zipping around, you increase your chances of developing, especially leukemia and lymphomas. And this is something that I've done some work on that technically I can't talk about until November 14th of this year because
whilst you're not talking about it, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm getting messages that there's a problem with the show and people need to restart. Can I just confirm before we go any further? Are people seeing this all right and hearing it okay? Just a quick answer before we go back to there's nothing wrong.
Seeing any
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, it was a PM that I got. Yeah, okay, everything seems to be working. Sorry, Concordance.
Yeah, so I have a non-disclosure agreement about the exact details on this as well. This is part of my work, always has some sort of privacy issue, but there's usually 2-year contracts. We can say in general, though, that there was talk of putting some medical diagnostic devices up on the International Space Station. But anybody that goes above the atmosphere is exposing themselves to a lot of ionizing radiation, and that ionizing radiation is increasing their cancer risk. So these long-term near space missions, microgravity missions, are all going to start to have medical complications around them as well. So there's going to need to be some thought put into how do you shield against these really high energy events, the ones that can knock loose an electron out of your DNA, producing a free radical, which can damage your DNA and result in mutations that cause cancer. So they're looking at various medical diagnostic techniques that could be used on the International Space Station. And I was involved in writing up some comparisons of those technologies and which ones were cost-effective and space-saving and energy-conserving, and we did a little bit of exploration along those different technologies. One of the biggest challenges is liquid and microgravity is a pain to work with, so anything liquid-based was going to be problematic. But anyway, if you're up there in your balloon in the near space, you're going to have to start dealing with even short-term trips increases your chance of cancer significantly. So if you don't die on the way down, if you don't hit your head on the balloon on the way down and crack your pressure suit and die in the first 15 seconds, there's always a chance 20 years later you miss out on a couple rounds of canasta.